Okay, it is 7 o'clock. So we have a lot to cover today, so we're just going to jump right on in. I assume we'll have people joining us throughout the hour. Again, my name is David Dodge. I am the executive editor of Gays with Kids. I'll introduce the rest of our panelists here in just a second, but I just want to welcome everyone. We're very excited to be doing this event. The election is now 20 days away, and I don't think I need to tell anyone joining that the impact on almost every last aspect of our lives, from healthcare to immigration to the very nature of our democracy, hangs in the balance, and issues impacting LGBTQ people and families specifically are also very much hanging in the balance. Everything from the future of marriage equality to our ability to serve as foster and adoptive parents are all up in the air. And so this is why we're very excited to be joined by a team of experts from organizations that really have been working at the front lines of affecting them in some cases for decades. And so we're going to have them help us kind of make sense of everything that's at stake and walk us through it as best as we can. So I'm going to introduce each of them just a little bit here. They'll be able to get into that much more when they present a little bit later. But we're very excited to be joined by Jim Obergefell and Matthew Ramsey, both from Family Equality. So Jim, you will know from the name plaintiff from the landmark marriage equality decision that legalized marriage equality nationwide. And he's also now the director of individual giving at Family Equality, recently joined there. Matthew Ramsey is the chief development officer at Family Equality, and he joined the organization in February 2018. We're also joined by Rick Davis, who is the regional director of the Western Regional Office for Lambda Legal, which is the oldest and largest legal organization fighting on behalf of LGBTQ families. And lastly, we're joined by Justin Unga, who's the Deputy National Campaign Director at the Human Rights Campaign. He's been there for over 15 years doing some really great, powerful organizing work. So I'm very excited about the diversity we have on this panel, the different aspects of the work. It really is a kind of a nice array of expertise and different ways to intersect with the ways that LGBTQ people are going to be impacted by the outcome of this election, and obviously the Supreme Court nomination that's taking place right now. Lastly, we're joined by Brian Rosenberg, who is the founder of Gays with Kids, started it with his husband Ferd 7 years ago. So he's going to be my helper throughout the webinar, helping answer questions and moderating the discussion. So just in terms of how this will work moving forward, so we're going to try to cram in a lot of conversation and topics in the next 30 to 40 minutes, kind of equally focused on the election for president, obviously, and also for the Senate and Congress, and what the different potential outcomes could mean for us. What does another 4 years of Trump presidency mean for us versus Biden? And then obviously all eyes are on the Supreme Court nomination process right now. And so we will get into that in depth, as well as to what that really means if we have Amy Coney Barrett joined the Supreme Court, along with the other conservative members who have already been coming after the decision in recent weeks. So with all that, we're going to start with the election, since it's front of mind and obviously very close, just 20 days away. But so I wanted to start by giving each of our panelists a chance to talk about one issue that your organizations would be excited to work on under a Biden presidency. So we're going to start on a positive note. And why don't we start with family equality, if Matthew, you want to take it first, and then Jim.
All right, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, David and Brian, for setting this up and for inviting all of us to participate in this. We're really excited to be here. And for this election, and specifically working with the Biden campaign, for family equality, our signature piece of legislation is called the Every Child Deserves a Family Act. And we've been working on this for a number of years. Right now, there are 11 states in the country where if you are an otherwise qualified LGBTQ individual or couple, you can be turned away by foster and adoption agencies that receive federal funding to do their work. So they're getting this money from the federal government, but they can say to you, even if you're qualified, that no, we don't work with families like yours. My husband and I, we live in the Seattle area. We adopted our 2 boys through the foster system. And to think that there are families in these various states that are just like mine and being turned away by agencies is heartbreaking, not just for for people like my husband and me, but for the thousands of youth in care who need safe and loving homes. So the Every Child Deserves a Family Act would outlaw that, and it would prevent that sort of discrimination from taking place. It would also outlaw conversion therapy in the child welfare system for LGBTQ youth who are in this system. We have been working on this for a number of years. Representative John Lewis was our lead champion for the Every Child Deserves a Family Act. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few months ago, but we have had over 220 representatives in the House sign on in support of this. And so if we are able to get a more favorable presidency and a more favorable Senate, and you can imagine what that would look like, then we are very optimistic that in 2021 we could get this officially passed in the House, moved through the Senate, passed in the Senate, and then hopefully signed into law by President Biden. So we're really optimistic about that, and we need that to be successful to protect families like mine and protect so many youth in the system.
Absolutely. Jim, anything you'd add to that from both just personal perspective and also from family equality's perspective?
Absolutely. You know, David, I also want to thank you and Brian for inviting us to be part of this evening. I'm thrilled to be here. And Matthew really covered from family equality's perspective what our primary goal would be. But I also think we would be involved in speaking out and working towards protecting marriage. With Justices Thomas and Alito's statement recently, we know that they're coming after marriage. So marriage is the start of family. Whether or not anyone has children or eventually has children, when you get married, you've started a family. And we are all about LGBTQ plus families. So personally, I will be doing everything I can in my power to fight for marriage, to make the case for why our marriages matter and why we deserve that right without exception in our nation. So fighting for marriage would definitely be something I'll be working toward, and you could expect family equality to jump in to help and to assist when necessary. I think another thing that I'll be working towards, and family equality would absolutely also be in support of, is moving the Equality Act forward. And the Equality Act, you know, in essence, the shorthand way of understanding that, it would update the 1964 Civil Rights Act to add gender identity and sexual orientation. So that would provide us those protections that other minorities currently enjoy in our nation. So again, another thing I would absolutely be involved in working towards, and also something that family equality believes in and would also be involved in helping move forward. Absolutely,
yeah. So it's important to keep in mind that there's, some of these pieces of legislation have been, out there proposed for years and years now, and under it, if we really do see a sweep of progressivism into Congress and into the presidency, that there really is reason for hope in that respect. So before I turn to my other panelists, I just want to invite people, as you are hearing us discuss these topics, we'll get to the Q&A at the end of the conversation, but feel free to start plopping in your questions using the Q&A function in the webinar. It should either be at the very top or very bottom of your screen. Also, for those of us watching on Facebook Live, feel free to comment there. Brian Rosenberg will be monitoring those. We'll make sure we get to as many of those questions as possible. Okay, so why don't we move to Justin from an organizing HRC perspective. What's been going on?
First of all, thank you, David. Again, thank you for creating space to talk about this. I think everybody will agree this is the most consequential election in our lifetimes, and we really do need all hands on deck to get through to the other side of November 3rd in a good place where we can do some of the things that we're talking about on this call. What we're doing with HRC, our number one priority, actually dates back a couple years. Last year, we made history. I think many people know we made history when we passed the Equality Act in the House of Representatives. And the Equality Act is a piece of legislation, comprehensive legislation, that updates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And really the key areas of life where LGBTQ folks, LGBTQ families really experience that. And that's in areas of employment, housing, public spaces, credit education. We did pass that in the House in 2019. We, however, did not pass it in the Senate. And of course, Donald Trump did not sign it into law. So putting one foot in front of the other, what we really need to do, and what we're doing every second of the day at HRC, is mobilizing voters, what we call equality voters, to turn out and vote so that we have not just a pro-equality House, which is what we have right now under Nancy Pelosi's House, but a pro-equality Senate, and then a pro-equality president who will sign it into law.
Absolutely. And so since you brought it up, and I know this is obviously a topic of great concern for HRC, what would you say is the impact that LGBTQ and allied voters can have on this election? Yeah. And is it something that you see changing and growing over the years that you've been doing this work for 15 years? Are you seeing that power change in any sort of significant way?
Absolutely. I will say and caveat that with LGBTQ voters and marginalized voters overall at large are united by one thing, and that is their deep, profound dislike of the current president, and they are mobilized by that exact thing. What we found after 2016 was that there has been a surge of LGBTQ voters and their allies. The electorate that turned out in 2018, many of you saw that was record number turnout. And that record number turnout flipped the House of Representatives. And we think it's that same record number turnout that will flip the House and get us the president. One third of the people who turned out in 2018 to flip the US House to Democratic control were what we call equality voters at HRC. And again, those are LGBTQ voters, and they're also voters who are our allies, people who are thinking about equality when they walk to the ballot box, when they vote by mail, or whatever their method of voting happens to be. So yeah, you could say that LGBTQ voters, equality voters, will decide this election. And we wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's been very heartening just from a personal perspective to see the share of allied voters that really are starting to take these issues seriously and vote on them. And just the sea change that's happened, 20 years ago compared to now, thanks to a lot of the great organizing that HRC and others has been doing. So that is another very encouraging sign. Okay, so lastly, Rick Davis from Lambda, if you want to give us the legal perspective on what you see happening under a Biden administration.
I will. Thank you so much, David and Brian, for inviting me to participate. I apologize in advance because you cannot see me right now, as I understand it. And that is because my Zoom video seems to have gone out. I've been on it all day, and of course, and it checked out in previews. So while I continue to work on that in the background, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I certainly appreciate to the other panelists that are here today with some great insight. I have to call out Jim Obergefell, who is a hero to our community. Lambda Legal, in our 47 years of putting cases forward and trying to make change through the courts. I cannot underestimate or undersell what it means to have plaintiffs who are willing to put themselves out there, take the slings and arrows that come their way in the belief of pursuing full equality for our community. And Jim has been a paragon of the virtues of selflessness and putting himself on the line to advance particularly the issues of marriage equality. And it is an honor to sit here on the panel with him today. As for Lambda Legal, I do need to start out with the disclaimer. We are a 501c3, which means that we cannot take a partisan political position. You will note, however, we very much have positions on the policies that are currently out there with the current administration. In fact, we are in court suing on more than a dozen of them at this very moment, or participating in lawsuits against them. So should the administration change, one of the things we are looking forward to on a number of levels, in those areas where we have filed a lawsuit, we are certainly looking forward to working, and by we, I'm talking in the broader sense, the entire legal advocacy community for the LGBT Q plus community and those with HIV. There are a lot of us out there in the trenches working through the court system. And what we hope to have happen is to have an administration that will fairly listen to the arguments that we have advanced in trying to stop this administration as they put their misguided policies into place and settle these cases in ways that are fair and advantageous and respect the equality and the dignity of our community. And, there is a laundry list of them, many of which you are aware of, such as, or if you're not, we'll certainly be talking about them, but there are issues surrounding the service of trans members of the military, as well as HIV members, affected members of the military, the provision of health care, and rules that have been promulgated to deny that health care. There are proposed rules as far as recognition and and we will certainly talk about using religion as a battering ram against our community. So there is a laundry list of things which we are hoping to change through the court system. And by the way, we got this idea, and we adopted this idea from the other side when they, as you know, drug many of the things that were accomplished under the Obama administration into court with the intention of running out the clock and changing the positions once they came to power. So we have adopted that strategy, and we are going forward in trying to make changes in that way. I will also note that it is important, while it's important what we can do in the courts to settle cases, it's also important what we would be able to do through Congress. There is a Congressional Review Act which will allow misguided policies that were put in at the latter part of an administration to be reviewed and summarily dismissed by Congress. We won't go into the details of it, but guess what? Once you drive a stake through the heart using that method, it cannot come back to life in the current form. So it is, should the Congress change as well as the presidency change, there are a lot of good things that we can do. There are limits on that, and we'll get to that because I think we're David in the happy talk portion of it. But there's a lot to look forward to if changes are effected.
Okay, so again, yeah, we started on the optimism, but now let's talk about the converse. So let's assume another 4 years of a Trump presidency, and maybe a non-democratic Senate or House. And actually, why don't we just stick with you, Rick, since we left off here? What would you say is the biggest concern, your top concern, if you were to have to pick one, facing the LGBT community under another 4 years of Trump and a Republican Congress?
Well, as you introduced so generously, David, Lambda Legal has made its case in the courts for 47 years. Walking us through, just getting basic recognition. Not many of us are too young to remember times when we could not create families. And in many cases, if we were coming out of marriages, opposite sex marriages, where our children would actually be taken from us and we would be barred from seeing or participating in their lives. There were truly dark days in the past. And it is not overstating the case that the policy objectives of this current administration, were they to continue for another 4 years, would definitely seek to drag us back to a place using both their policy objectives and the courts, which they have been packing with justices at all levels, which are hostile to our community, our movement, and actually the basic concepts of equality. Many have said horrible things. So driving us back into the closet or underground, for many in this movement is not, in that movement is not a fringe idea. It is a central tenet of how they would like to operate. As Judge Barrett in her remarks said this week, it's about who decides. And that is code for sending a lot of things back to the states to decide. And as we know, there are states that are never going to decide on the side of equality. There are states who had major fights about removing the issue of slavery from their books just up to a few years ago. It is not likely that they are going to turn around and see the light, and in fact will probably revert back to some of the very hostile and threatening language that we have seen them try to advance right now, such as those states that have the Don't Say Gay or the so-called No Promo Homo laws on their books for school teachers in talking about sex and sex education in their classes, all the way toward who can be a family and how to constitute a family. As said, I'm a foster adopt father as well, and those may not be options in some states if the who decides question comes down in the wrong way. So I am not trying to scare people, but trying to scare people because it is a reality, and we do need to have all hands on deck at this moment to challenge that.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move to family equality. What would you say, Matthew, if you want to take it first, is your top concern if we are facing another 4 years of a Trump presidency?
Okay, can I remove my family equality hat for just a second and say my top concern? I could give you 1,000, but okay, putting that back on. And I do want to say, just to piggyback a little bit on what both Jim and Justin had talked about earlier, with both the Every Child Deserves a Family Act and the Equality Act, we are all coalition partners in these together. And so we are all working to advance both of those pieces of legislation, and they dovetail very nicely with each other. So they're not in any way competitive or anything along those lines. So I wanted to clarify that aspect of it. I guess there's so many things that we are concerned about. I feel like for family equality, if Trump were to win re-election, it kind of puts us back on the defensive again, or I guess offensive depending on how you're looking at it, because last November, the Trump administration proposed a new rule that would create a license to discriminate, and allowing taxpayer-funded programs such as adoption and foster care agencies to deny services to LGBT youth and families. And so we sued the Trump administration, and so that lawsuit is ongoing. We would continue with that, and we would not hesitate to sue them for other sorts of issues that discriminate or infringe upon our rights. And we'd continue to work with HRC and Lambda and all the other ACLU, other organizations out there to keep fighting. But the problem is, like I said, we would probably be on the defensive because the Trump administration in a lot of cases would come up with rules or, even things that along those lines that can really infringe upon our rights. So we will continue, if it gets to that point, we will continue to be alert and following everything that he does and taking action when necessary.
Absolutely, thanks. So Justin from Human Rights Campaign. So I know I'm a former community organizer as well. So I know that we're trying to never admit or even entertain the idea of defeat. But for HRC, what is your top fear if we do end up with another 4 years of Trump?
Well, it's hard to fathom that they could do worse. So I think it's first important to acknowledge what has already happened and what would continue to happen in another 4 years of Donald Trump. One of the first things that this administration did was a ban on transgender military service members. And even John McCain himself said, with less than 1% of all Americans volunteering for our armed services, it makes no sense at all. And it in fact impacts our military readiness to completely bar people from serving in the military. So that's just one thing. And of course, that is something that impacts our community and it impacts national security. Yes. Another thing, this administration eliminated LGBTQ people from the census. And it's hard to understate how profound of an impact that will have. The census is meant to create public policy based on counts of people. So if you are not counted in the census, that means you are not seen by public policy. It means that the dollars that you pay in taxes do not see you as a family, does not go to you as a family. So that's incredibly important. And this is additionally an administration, as Matthew said, that continues to fight for this license to discriminate, not just in adoption, but in really key areas of life, including services, including healthcare. Yes. So the right to refuse healthcare to somebody based on their gender identity, based on their sexual orientation. This is what this administration is about. I mean, that's the start of the list. Yes. So I'm afraid of what the end of the list would be after 4 years. I'm still worried about what we're dealing with at the start of this administration.
Absolutely. And so I want to also give space because I think, so again, Gays with Kids is an organization, the biggest online resource and online magazine for gay, bi, and trans men and fathers. So the focus of this really is about the impact that this could have on our families, which, the things that come to mind are marriage and like you've all mentioned, our ability to continue serving as foster and adoptive parents. But you've all mentioned there's so much more on the line. And I just want to give a moment, especially this year when we've seen, the importance of really thinking beyond just our community and the intersections with the movement for racial justice that's been also happening this summer, and making sure that we're lifting up the most vulnerable of all of our populations. This is an open question if there's anything that hasn't been mentioned yet that you think should be front of mind for us as a concern going into these last couple of weeks of the election. If anyone wants to jump in.
I'm going to just squeeze this in, and I'm sure other folks might have something to say. I mentioned this earlier, particularly the first thing that Trump did was to eliminate transgender service members. It's really important to understand what the tone this administration is setting against our transgender brothers, sisters, and siblings. We passed a grim milestone just this week with a death in Shreveport. A transgender woman was found dead in Shreveport, making her the 32nd death of a transgender woman, just transgender person this year. And that is the most transgender deaths since we started counting back in 2013. So again, it's really, really hard to understate the kind of tone, the kind of violence that this administration has produced against our community.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to add anything there? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, David, I would like to say, of course I'm going to talk about marriage. How could I not? Even if Obergefell v. Hodges is not overturned. And I will tell you, a lot of people I've talked to said they don't think that's going to happen. Marriage is so it would create such a mess if they overturned marriage equality. And marriage is something that spreads throughout our lives as Americans. It isn't one discrete thing, so it would create a terrible mess. But what they will continue to do, if we don't have a pro-equality president and Congress, they will continue to chip away at what our marriages mean. They'll continue to find ways to deny us bits and pieces of equality that other married couples, other families enjoy. And what they will end up doing is creating what Ruth Bader Ginsburg referred to as skim milk marriages. So for me, that's one of the things we will absolutely see if the administration doesn't change. The other thing I'd like to say is, as a community, we really never joined We the People from the Supreme Court's perspective until 1996 in the Romer case. And that was a non-discrimination case in Colorado, a statewide non-discrimination policy. Well, that was the first time we really became part of We the People as a community. And then we had Lawrence versus Texas, United States versus Windsor, Obergefell, Bostock. For me, I think of 4 more years of a non-pro-equality administration, and I see further attempts to remove us from the Constitution, to say, no, you are not part of We the People. And I think that kind of encompasses the whole thing, what we risk if we have 4 more years of this.
Absolutely. So, and I think that's actually a great segue. If others want to jump in on this question, feel free. But just quickly, I want to give you a chance, Jim, to talk a little bit about what this experience has been like. We were talking before the webinar started about what it must be like to have your name, splashed across the news all of a sudden, all over again, just like it was several years back when we won marriage equality nationwide. So what has this process been like for you as someone, an icon that really has helped get us to this point, and then to be on the precipice of seeing those rights potentially in question?
Right. Thanks, David. I have to say the past week or so has been incredibly difficult, because when I hear all of these lawmakers, all of these people who are anti-LGBTQ equality saying my name, it hurts. And I really want to ask them, please don't say my name. You don't have the right to say my name, because my name has come to represent something incredible, something joyful. It represents a step our nation took on the path towards becoming a more perfect union. And it really, really hurts me to hear the people saying my name who are. But I also know I can't give up hope. And the past 7 years, from the point John and I filed our suit until now, including the Supreme Court decision, what I have learned over those past 7 years is what keeps me going and what gives me hope. Because over those 7 years, it wasn't just about me and John. It wasn't about the two of us and the other 30 plus plaintiffs in the case. It was about the people across our nation who deserve to grow up in a better world than the one I grew up in. And that's what gives me hope. That's what keeps me moving. That's what keeps me motivated. So when I think about my experience going to the Supreme Court and everything since, that's what I remember. And it's really, really represented when I speak with young people and parents who want a photo with me with their kids because, as they put it, because of me, they know their child can one day marry the person they love. But it's also these young kids who come up and speak to me after an event, and they've never told anyone before, including themselves, but they share with me that they're LGBTQ+. That's such a gift to me, and it's those moments, those personal interactions I have that make everything that might happen, including the pain of the past couple of weeks, makes it all worthwhile, because I know I'm making a difference in those kids' lives. And to me, that's the best motivation, the best reason to do anything on this planet, is for the younger generations. Make sure they have a better world. So that's what keeps me going. That's what I focus on. And as I told a 12-year-old boy here in Columbus, I live in Columbus, Ohio, his mom reached out because her son David was worried. Mom, Are they going to take away the right to marry before I can ever exercise it? And I reminded him, this is something Rick said earlier, David, don't worry. I mean, you can be worried, you can be upset, you can be scared, but never forget there are countless people across this nation, including lots of organizations who are out there fighting for him, for everyone in our community, for every marginalized community, to make sure we all are part of we the people, and that we all receive equal justice under law. So that's the other thing that gives me hope, gives me strength, is thinking about David and kids like him and letting them know that they're not alone. We're in their corner. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So Rick, I'm going to come to you for a second to talk a little bit more about how concerned we should be about marriage equality specifically. So I think this is all front of mind for a lot of LGBTQ people because of recent comments by Justices Alito and Thomas, who seem to encourage the court to reconsider the Obergefell decision, which legalized marriage equality nationwide. I guess within the context of everything else we're saying, all the other concerns related to trans rights, healthcare, the military, how worried should we be about marriage specifically? And again, this is true regardless of who wins the election, obviously, given the Supreme Court nomination happening right now. But how worried should we be about that in comparison to some of the other issues in the community? And you're on mute again, Rick.
We need to be concerned. I think Jim stated it beautifully, and I do think the consensus is that all marriages will be taken away. We have spent the last week since Justices Thomas and Alito came out with their statement fielding calls at our help desk, where we get over 7,000 calls a year. And it is rare that, and we, for all of our existence, most of those calls have been regarding employment discrimination. The fear that is out there in our community really mirrors what Jim talked about with that 12-year-old boy, that a hard-won right may be taken away. I want to assure people that at this moment, that is not the case. People's marriages are secure. There are constitutional limits on removing rights that have been previously been granted. So it will be a mess if in some way a court decision eventually comes through which takes on marriage equality. As Justices Thomas said in his statement with Alito, the case that they were considering that they turned down came from that odious clerk in Kentucky who the facts did not present themselves. So for this to come down in a clean way, in the way people fear, a case will need to be brought. It will need to work its way up through the court system. We anticipate meeting resistance along the way because Obergefell is the precedent and the law of the land. And then we will have a fight on our hands. But that is not to say that marriage cannot be undone through backdoor channels. We are currently in the court fighting right now in many instances for recognition of our marriages on birth certificates of our children, on death certificates of deceased spouses, for Social Security benefits for surviving spouses, for also, my goodness, there's any number of cases where getting that full equality, and right now we do have Obergefell to help us pursue that within the courts. However, so don't think the job is done totally as far as marriage equality. The reactionary forces are still there. The one reactionary force which has come up a lot in the hearings, and America has woken up to, is that of religious exemptions. This is going to present itself squarely in the court next term, actually a week after the election, in the case out of Philadelphia regarding Fulton, which deals definitely with adoptive services. The Catholic Charities does not wish to provide children to gay couples, but still wants taxpayer money to pursue their aims. And they believe that religious freedom should allow them to discriminate. Well, we are going to see religious freedom held up as a tenet for discriminating on marriages more and more, and basically carving out a loophole which will, as Jim quoted Justice Ginsburg earlier, which provides that skim milk marriage, which is, yes, you are married in name and in those jurisdictions that will recognize the full equality, but in other jurisdictions, they will carve out holes that you can drive a Mack truck through, because people will be able to say, my religion tells me that I do not have to, that I should not honor this marriage. I don't recognize it, and therefore I do not need to treat you as an equal or provide you the citizenship benefits. And that goes, our opponents have been very clever to sort of present this in the area of photography or wedding cakes. Trust me, it's not about the cake. It is about building this loophole so that people who operate in the general stream of commerce and government services, such as Kim Hively, will not have to provide equality to their customers or the citizens that appear before them because they wish to discriminate. And that is the real threat. That's not to say there's not a threat of a total overthrow, because there are certainly people on the right that would love that. But the more likely way, which is coming at us sooner rather than later, is through this religious exemption push that we've already seen building on in so many areas, and it's going to get its first real test under this new court very shortly after the election.
Right, absolutely. And as you were kind of hinting at, this was going to be a concern regardless of the makeup of the court. Even with Ginsburg on it, the balance was, it was still potentially up in the air. So Justin, I would love to know if you agree with Rick's kind of reasoning there in terms of our concerns around marriage, and then again the Fulton versus Philadelphia case, what you are thinking about in terms of the implications that holds for LGBTQ people and families.
Sorry about the problem. Taking myself off.
Yeah, I'm not the only one.
I'm definitely that guy. You're on mute, Justin. I am not a lawyer, so I will let my lawyer friends opine on the Fulton cases and the Supreme Court cases. What I will say is, my job at HRC is to do campaigns, and it is to provide the other two branches, the executive branch, which we need, legislative branch, which we need. And at the same time, while we're talking about these cases, is our protections are eroded. It's important for us to walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I mean by that is to, yes, fight for and advance pro-equality legislation at the federal level, but also fight for and advance pro-equality legislation at the state level. So currently, again, this is all under the framework of potentially rights being eroded. We need to strengthen them on all fronts. Currently, in roughly half of the states, LGBTQ folks are not protected from discrimination, fully protected from discrimination. It is very possible that when you leave your state and drive across state lines, you lose it. You lose the protections that are afforded to you in New York, California, and other places. So, all of this is to say that we need to fortify the rights, and that is by passing the Equality Act at the federal level so that your rights do not depend on your zip code, right? Like your rights in New York should not be different when you cross the border into a different state. And then we also have to fortify rights at the state level. I'm very, very proud of the work that we did in Virginia this year. First, and this is how these things work, right? First, we helped elect a pro-equality legislature in Virginia in 2019. It went from anti-equality. It was a Republican majority. Republicans had blocked pro-equality legislation, and we said, okay, well, we're not going to put up with that anymore. We're going to help out here and produce a pro-equality legislature. In 4 months after that election, we passed the Virginia Values Act, which was comprehensive non-discrimination protections for all Virginians. So all of this is to say, yes, we're having a SCOTUS conversation, but the other two branches are incredibly important to protect the rights that we have and advance the ones that we need.
Absolutely. So we have 15 minutes left, and we have a lot of other questions that I'm hoping that we can get to. I think some of this will come up in Q&A, so I'm going to invite people again. If you have any questions about the election, SCOTUS, any of the topics that we've talked about relating to LGBTQ issues, feel free to use the Q&A function at the top or bottom of your screen, or you can chat us privately. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can comment there. And as we're waiting for some of these to come in, I also want to start asking each of you, so, again, like the issues that we've raised today are, so much of it's up in the air. So much of it depends on the outcome of the election. But it's not over yet, and there's still ways that we can get involved. I know each of your organizations are still, you're going to do this work, whoever wins the election. And you also have lots of different ways for people to get involved. Let's start with you, Matthew. If you could just tell us what's one way that or several ways that people can get involved in these last remaining weeks to make a difference in the outcome of the election and just generally for LGBTQ rights.
Sure, and if I can I go back just to what we were talking about briefly?
Absolutely.
Just to say that I think, and I'm not a lawyer either, but I know from our chief policy officer that when it comes to the statement that that Alito and Thomas made last week, it's no different from the statement they made 5 years ago, right? And so what's unique is the fact that Roberts didn't join them. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh didn't even join them. And so that's not to say that marriage equality is a foregone conclusion, that it's going to stay with us, but I do think that really we're not worse off in terms of those two. We're worse off with the death of Justice Ginsburg, I think, and we're worse off, of course, from Trump's administration as a whole and the justices he's been able to confirm. And I also I want to talk briefly about what Family Equality's role has been in the Fulton case. We submitted an amicus brief of dozens of stories of LGBTQ families, some of which, through discrimination, saw foster siblings separated. We saw youth who were never adopted and aged out of the system, and we shared a number of really successful stories of our families. And so we are going to continue sharing those stories, and we're actually partnering with the Gill Foundation to release an array of storytelling videos, which will delve into some of these stories more deeply, because the more we can get the general public to understand what's at play here, and the fact that, yes, marriage equality may not go away, but they're going to chip away at our rights in all of these other ways, the more we can get the public to understand that, and we know that public support is on our side, then we can apply pressure, not only to Congress, but even to the Supreme Court justices. So that's sort of what we're really trying to play with and keep that going into the future, regardless of the election, because of the the makeup of the Supreme Court right now. In terms of getting involved with family equality, the best thing you can do, and I think David, you'll be sending out the link, but you can join us by taking the pledge to end discrimination in the child welfare system, and we'll send you the link to that. But really, you're taking that pledge to help us get the Every Child Deserves a Family Act passed into law, and to really continue to battle against this discrimination and based on what they're calling religious liberty as we move forward.
Great. And so, as Matthew mentioned, we're going to be sending out an email after this with links for each of these organizations as to ways you can get involved and donate in the closing weeks of the campaign. So look forward to that. We'll also put them into the chat function before the webinar is over. But Justin, do you want to just say briefly ways that people can get involved in the closing weeks?
Yeah. First, I think it's important not to get too comfortable with what you're seeing on television right now with polls showing Joe Biden in double-digit leads. It's also important to remember that at this point in 2016, Hillary Clinton was ahead by double-digit leads. So I say this to urge everybody who's listening right now to help out one way or the other. And here are the ways to do that. First, vote. If you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and do that right now. Yes, you can vote early. There are many, many, many places that have early voting locations open up just right now. You can vote by mail. And I would suggest that you get your ballot and mail it right now. Or you can make a plan to vote on election day. Most important is just to vote. The second thing is to help others vote. If you know an 18-year-old, somebody who just turned 18 is not yet registered to vote, please make sure that they do that now. And then the rest of it is all about turning out people to vote. Yes, and that takes some work. And it is not the funnest work. It means that we will be calling people who don't know us, don't know why we're calling, and but likely agree with us that something needs to change in the country. And it is, again, it is the least favorite activity among people, but it is the most necessary. Candidates, political parties, organizations like ours raise lots and lots of money, and really all that we're doing with that money is communicating with voters. And the best way to do that really is for people to do it, person-to-person communication. So that is the absolute number one best, most helpful way to help, and you can do that at hrc.org. Now, if you're one of those people who can't do it, won't do it, it's not possible to do it, the last thing that I would recommend is throw $5 at an organization like ours, any of the ones that you show here. We're all contributing to the same work. HRC, again, that $5 contributes to my ability to have a team that does this. Throw $5 to a candidate contributes to their ability to communicate with communicate with voters.
Absolutely. Great. So yeah, we're getting some good Q&A questions in both privately and on our Q&A function. Rick, do you want to just give a quick 30-second overview of what people can do?
Sure. So not to repeat everything that I agree with totally that has just been said, election protection is going to be important in this election. If you have the ability, please volunteer or encourage others to work as poll workers. Our community should be out there supporting it. If you're not able to do that, you can also volunteer with campaigns to be poll watchers. Educate yourself, keep in the know. We run a Facebook Live weekly session, just sort of answering questions leading up to the election and around the Supreme Court as well as in any election. Please follow us, get into the know on all the social media channels as well. All that's accessible through our website. Educate yourself, just like it took for us to get publicity. Come out to people, talk to them about your experiences and your fears. That I can't stress enough, the personal connection that was just cited. That's what makes a difference. Telling people your story, that's what's got us where we are faster than any other civil rights movement in the history of the world to the advances. And that's what's going to carry us the rest of the way through. Being honest and open with others so that they see what's on the line with the decisions that they make.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So we're going to get through as many of these Q&As as we can in the last 7 minutes. I hope that we were able to answer most of your questions. If we don't get to something you specifically want to answer, please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. We'll make sure to follow up with you and get you the answer to the question you're looking for. But we'll start with the Q&A questions we have here. So the first is a question about Amy Coney Barrett, who the questioner says is coming across as sincere to some people in the general public. For example, the thing that came up in the hearing yesterday about apologizing for using the term sexual preference rather than orientation. So do the panelists think that she's just flat out lying and doing whatever she needs to get confirmed, or do you think that there is something to her sincerity? I'll open that up to whoever wants to take it or has an opinion.
Her record speaks for itself. She has advanced discriminatory policies. She is cleverly hiding them. The apology was a non-apology. There is a difference when you believe preference that we've all made choices to live a certain way as opposed to orientation. If you've made a choice, it's a lot easier to take those rights away. She apologized if she offended someone, but she did not apologize for the use of the term or go into a description of why the term mattered. So, yeah, watch what people do, not what they say, especially in this setting.
I'll follow along with Rick. You know, again, this is me personally, Jim Obergefell speaking. She knew what she was doing by using that phrase. Saying sexual preference is a phrase that opponents of equality, of LGBTQ plus equality, have used for years as a way to demean us and to imply that we exist by choice instead of existing by virtue of being born the way we are. So I agree with Rick. I don't find that apology sincere. And she knew what she was doing. She's too smart. She's too young to not know that that was an offensive term.
I see a lot of nodding heads, so I'm going to move on to the next question, but Matthew and Justin, feel free to jump in if you have something you'd like to add to that. But this next question, I think, is a really important one and something that hasn't come up in the discussion yet, which is whether things like in vitro fertilization and surrogacy as family planning options for gay, bi, and trans men might be impacted in all of this, which is, I think, an important one to be considering. It might not come up quite as readily or as obviously in this discussion, but it is something that potentially could be impacted. So why don't we start with you, Matthew?
Second parent adoption. I can't say it enough. It sucks that you have to adopt your own biological child, but you have to do it. You have to protect yourself and your family. They are going to continue to chip away at our rights in whatever way they can. Your name on a birth certificate is not necessarily enough. Get that second parent adoption. I would have said this a year ago. This is separate from the Supreme Court issue and the election and all of that. You just have to do it. That way, if you're traveling and you're in a state that's not going to be friendly to you, you've got that documentation right there and you don't have to worry about it. So I think, aside from that, family building should continue as it has, and people will continue to build their families in whatever way they deem most appropriate. You just have to protect yourself and your family.
Yep, absolutely. So Justin or Rick, go ahead. Go ahead, Rick, go ahead.
I would just quickly throw in, under the Affordable Care Act, which has gotten a lot of other play, discrimination in the healthcare toward our communities is illegal. If that goes down, some of those protections will go down with it.
Anything you'd add, Justin? Cool, okay. Awesome. Okay, so we have a question that is another great one from Jeffrey that says he has family that is supportive, but are also pro-Trump. Whenever the conversation comes up, they're quick to say that they would never knowingly vote for a homophobic, racist, or xenophobic person. But when he tries to give examples of how the administration is all of these things, my facts are not something I have been able to prove in stone, with the exception of rights being taken away from trans people in the Army and the ACA. So he's looking for resources. So I know Matthew dropped one into the Q&A, but this is, I think, a great question. Other resources that you think LGBTQ people can use as organizers in their own families and communities to try to both persuade people to, to vote for pro-LGBT equality people. Do you want to take that, Justin?
Yeah, my answer is going to be a little bit different. And I'm looking at your question a little bit different, because I don't think it's your rights that are up for debate in this context. It is the facts. Currently, we live in a world where facts are debatable. So regardless of the source, depending on the ideology that you're addressing, you will continue to be fake news. And in our work, in what we consider interrupting oppression, we always try to lead with, I point to Jim's story as the most persuasive thing, rather than facts, which can be fake news, whether you believe it or not. The thing that can be the most persuasive is simply, how does this administration impact you? How does it impact your family? What are the things that you are afraid of? And some of the things that Jim said, the things that make him hopeful and the things that scare him, those are, I guarantee, far more persuasive than an article on CNN.
Absolutely. So in our last minute remaining, I just want to first thank all of our panelists so much for joining us. This has been a super important discussion, I think. So again, I'm David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. We're very excited to be doing more of these sorts of things. We're trying to find more opportunities to connect our growing community on social media and on our website in person, or just to find these kind of ways to talk about these very important issues. So we have events weekly like this coming up. So please do go to our website at gayswithkids.com and see other opportunities to engage with our community in that way. And then, so I just want to give our panelists each an opportunity to sign off by saying a little bit about, again, anywhere you want to direct people to, and then also just one thing that's given you hope as we enter the last days of this campaign. Why don't we start with you, Justin, since we left off?
Or the link is in this chat box. If you can't see it, just go to hrc.org to get involved today. We only have 20 days, and you don't want to wake up on November 4th the way that we woke up 4 years ago. So I urge you, I beg you, please help us out there. The thing that's giving me hope is the surge of people voting. The very first day, I live in DC, but I'm close enough to Virginia to have seen the news. The very first day of early voting in Virginia, almost 2 weeks ago, 500,000 people showed up to vote that weekend. It's the most it's ever showed up for that kind of voting. And we continue to see it. You saw it in Georgia just yesterday. To me, that sounds like democracy just roaring back to life. And that is precisely what we need as the antidote to what's happening right now. So that gives me hope. Do not get comfortable. Just help us out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Rick.
I would ditto everything that's just been said. I also put our website in the box for additional resources or information. Please reach out to our help desk if you have a particular legal question or a concern, or just want to check something that you've heard to see if that's legal. Information is power in this instance. The fact that my hope is the fact that people are getting informed and they're acting on it and they're showing up and they're voting and they're taking it seriously. And some of our issues are rising to the top of the conversations. That's what gives me hope. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel.
Of course, thank you for being here. Matthew.
Well, thank you to all of you. It's great to chat with you, and thank you so much for inviting me and for inviting Family Equality. And I think, yeah, please take the pledge, and if you can donate, we would really appreciate your support. I think what gives me hope is that through all the polling and the surveys that we and other organizations have done, and I said this before, is that people are on our side. The majority of the American people support LGBTQ plus families. They support LGBTQ plus rights as a whole. You wouldn't necessarily know that all the time when you see what's happening in our politics and at the Supreme Court, but they do. The challenge is that a lot of people don't understand, now that we have marriage equality, that these other discriminations still exist. So the hope is that people are on our side. The challenge is making them aware of what's out there. And so please, that's one other thing I would ask of all of you. Continue to make your friends and family aware.
Absolutely. And lastly, but not least, Jim.
You know, I think I'm going to end just with my hope. And my hope is something that hasn't changed. And I'll use a story to illustrate it. Harvey Milk said, "Come out, tell your story. It's the only way people will know us as people, as real human beings." And my story to illustrate that, when I was sitting in the courtroom for oral arguments in 2015, the gentleman sitting next to me in the courtroom, when he learned who I was, shook my hand and thanked me for fighting the right fight. He thanked me for fighting for marriage equality. And then he told me that he was an evangelical Republican. And the fact that he was on our side was he watched us, he knew John's and my story. Stories have so much power. Stories how we connect with other people. Stories are how we make something that can seem so abstract to someone else. We can make that real and understandable and relatable. So my hope, it's been my hope for years. It's what gives me hope. Tell your story. Tell your family's story. Help others understand why you're concerned, why you're afraid, but also help them understand that your family is not any different than their family. We all want the ability to love someone and to create our own family and to protect them. So tell your story. That gives hope to me. That gives hope to our nation. It gives hope to your children. So do that. Tell your story.
Thank you, Jim. So I can't thank the four of you enough. I hope for everyone watching that we were able to answer your questions. Again, if we were not able to, especially for those on the Facebook Live comments, please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. And I'll just say for my own part, again, I'm David Dodge, the executive editor of Gays with Kids. And what gives me hope is that regardless of the impact or the outcome of the upcoming election, that we're going to have four advocates like this fighting no matter what happens. So to have organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, and Family Equality fighting on the front lines daily to protect and expand our rights is what gives me hope, and I can't thank you all enough. So we will see you on the door knocking on the phones hopefully soon. Look out for an email from us soon with links to get involved, and thank you all again so much.